Okay. Well, welcome to today's call and a very happy start to Immigrant Heritage Month and also Pride Month today. We are just so delighted to be here today. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about our goals and our agenda. But first of all, just want to welcome you to the call. My name is Rachel Parrich. I'm the Executive Director of Welcoming America, an organization whose vision is a more just world in which we each belong and can thrive in the communities we call home, no matter where we've come from. Today, we're going to be hearing from philanthropic leaders and on-the-ground practitioners about how we can expand our collective capacity to be a more welcoming America, starting right in our own backyards. The impetus for this call really came out of the arrival of Afghans and the need to rebuild and rethink that welcoming capacity, followed shortly by the arrival of Ukrainians. But the story of welcoming communities did not begin with, nor will it end with these two moments. This is long-term community building work that we're talking about today. Some of you who are joining this call are learning about this work for the first time. Many of you who are joining are long-timers who have been at the forefront of the welcoming movement. And I just want to begin by acknowledging and thanking you for your many years of efforts to set the stage for the many new welcomers who are stepping forward in this moment. This is what a growing movement looks like. And it's up to us to grow it in the most abundant way possible. My own family came to this country as refugees. My grandfather, in fact, was a refugee from Ukraine. And it's been just wonderful to see our response to Ukrainians arriving in this moment. But I would also like to see us extend that same generosity, that same welcome to people from Central America, from Haiti, from Africa, from across the globe, so that people from around the world can continue to call themselves Americans, and American communities can continue to harness and benefit from the strengths and contributions of all Americans, white, Black, Indigenous, refugee, immigrant, newcomer, and those who have been here for generations. And the welcoming efforts I see in communities everywhere is a constant reassurance that we have the capacity to do just that. Welcoming efforts are really the answer to the question, how can democracies build their capacity to go from us versus them to we, and from strangers to neighbors, in an era when more people than ever will be on the move? So I really look forward to digging in today around how we can do that in bigger ways, in bolder ways, and with the support of more of us. I want to thank Open Society Foundations for their longtime support for Welcoming America, our members, and the welcoming movement globally, and thank Gregory Maniatis and his team, particularly Leora Danan, for their role and leadership in that. And in a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to Gregory, and if we could go to the agenda, please, who will be then followed by Nazanin Ash, who I'm really delighted is joining us today. She leads a new campaign called Welcome.us, and is going to situate us in this moment and some of the new welcomers who are stepping forward. After that, we have a fantastic panel with community leaders who are going to be talking about this work from the different vantage points that they're situated in. And then we'll close up with some next steps around how everyone on the call can get more involved. I believe Gregory Maniatis is on the call now. And if he is, I'm going to turn it over to him. Looks like maybe he hasn't quite joined yet. So in that case, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nazanin, and we'll come back to Gregory in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much for starting us off so well with exactly the right vision and ambition. I'm looking forward to Gregory and the and OSF colleagues joining. It's hard to start this conversation without, as you did, recognizing the moment that we're in and the community of partners we're privileged to have on this call, and that are in so many ways thanks to a shared vision of a participatory and expansive and welcoming America. So huge thanks to all of our guests for joining. I'm thrilled to be here today with so many impactful frontline welcomers. As Rachel mentioned, I'm privileged to be the CEO of Welcome.us, a new national effort stood up to inspire and empower Americans from across divides to unite in the common purpose of welcoming newcomers, meeting their essential needs, and helping them thrive. You'll find in those words, so many elements that we hold in common, we want to recognize the way in which what we're building here is a collective movement that we're building together. I want to pause for a moment because I see that Gregory's joined. Rachel, do you want to return to Gregory, or do you want? I'll take your cues. Hi, Gregory.
Keep going, Naz. I was in a parallel universe. You were all there, but you couldn't hear me. I don't know what happened, but I joined from another computer. You go ahead.
Well, the universe is a better place with you in it, Gregory. So I'm glad that you were able to join, and very much feel like this community is a big. It's a community that you've nurtured in really special ways. So I'll turn it over to you in a minute. We were stood up, as I started to say, in the midst of the national challenge that Rachel identified to resettle nearly 80,000 Afghan newcomers on a government system that had in the previous year welcomed just over 11,000 refugees. But it was a challenge that we knew we could meet if we tapped into the broader capacity and the extraordinary willingness of our communities, our citizens, our private and civic sectors to welcome and support vulnerable newcomers. But our broadest ambition, as Rachel reminded us, that's shared with and demonstrated by so many of you on this call, is that by bringing more people and institutions into the work of welcoming, we can build a durable, diverse constituency for welcoming vulnerable newcomers from everywhere, now and going into the future, and ensure that the United States is a place where they are welcome and they can thrive. My role in today's conversation is to set a little bit of the global context for our collective work. So thank you so much. We can go to the next slide. And in many ways, the work we're doing together has never been more urgent. There's an estimated 100 million people forcibly displaced across the globe. That represents a mid-year adjustment accounting for the incredible displacement of Ukrainians just over the last several months. On average, over the last decade, less than 3% of this population will be able to return home, and less than 1% have the opportunity to resettle and rebuild in a new nation. The vast majority of those displaced are unable to work legally, send their kids to school, access regular social services, or other tools that help them rebuild their lives. It's an astonishing loss of human capacity, potential, and dignity, and an astonishing lost opportunity for those of us who stand to benefit from their contributions. We can go to the next slide. You can see here that compared to other countries globally, the US is doing vastly less than its fair share of welcoming. We know we can do more, and it's why we're here. We're ready to step up in so many ways, as demonstrated by so many of you on this call. And in many countries, as we see in Poland, in Moldova, the UK, and elsewhere, it's been citizens leading the movement for welcome, far exceeding both government systems' capacity and the perceived political constraints. Next, please. So just since last August, the US has accepted nearly 90,000 refugees through the US resettlement system and some emerging other pathways. We're now expecting at least 100,000 Ukrainian newcomers, largely through private sponsorship. And that's on top of the Biden administration's previous commitment before these two crises to admit 125,000 refugees from crises globally. And as Rachel reminded us, we have so many others seeking refuge and opportunity here in the United States through multiple pathways. But just to put it in perspective, For our refugee resettlement system, that's nearly 20 times as many refugees for this year as what the US resettled in the last fiscal year. But we have tremendous capacity to welcome if we tap into the much broader capacity of our American communities and our American institutions. We launched Welcome.us in the aftermath of the evacuation, but we started it not because we thought Americans would need convincing to welcome many more, but because so many Americans were raising their hands and asking how they could help. So let's talk a little bit about the how of the campaign. If we could go to the next slide. Oops, nope. Skipping a few more. Oh, can we go forward to the next? Here, thank you. And then we'll go back. So we've really just created a center of gravity for all who want to help. And we've centered our initiatives around the desire Americans have and American institutions have to step up and support newcomers, but they just need the pathways to do it. So we work in formal partnership with the US government and resettlement agencies and community organizations on the ground so we can be responsive. We work with diverse companies and American people and identify diverse pathways for participation, smooth the pathways for participation, and build solutions that make it easy for people to welcome and make their contributions. And we want to tell their stories because we see so much opportunity in that storytelling. Welcoming is so much about how it transforms the welcomer as much as it is about those we welcome here. And it's why we call it Welcome.us. Next slide, please. I think some of the tremendous examples of how this new movement of participation is coming together are represented in what we've all accomplished together in just the last 9 months, with the nation's largest, most diverse welcoming coalition representing everyone from the private sector to the arts to media to community organizations and resettlement organizations, so many of you represented here. Bringing in new service organizations and innovating around new methodologies to allow citizens to sponsor refugees directly. Sponsor circles now in nearly every state in the country, and iconic service institutions from Lions Clubs International to Samaritan's Purse to Islamic Relief USA, mobilizing their clubs and their chapters and their churches and their congregations and their mosques to directly support the arrival of vulnerable newcomers. The work of the Welcome Fund has been such an incredible way for Americans to participate, raising nearly 20 million to date from over 1,000 large and small donors, and demonstrating a new and innovative and rapid way of deploying resources. We're so excited that in our last round, we distributed over $5.5 million to nearly 150 organizations, 2/3 of which were Afghan, Muslim, veteran, or refugee-led. It represents the breadth and depth about how our communities are responding. And we're partnering now to mobilize 100,000 Americans to sponsor people fleeing the war in Ukraine, and looking to build and demonstrate, again, the tremendous capacity Americans have to welcome. And I want to go back 2 slides now to share a vision that I learned from my colleague on this call, Dia, whom you'll hear from later, about what it can look like if we tap into the full potential of our communities. So this is the capacity that we have if we're only relying on our very traditional systems and the heroic work of resettlement agencies and government funds. But if we tap into the full slate of the potential we're talking about here, Afghan American organizations, Ukrainian American organizations, veterans, and countless other community organizations, Lions Clubs and Rotaries and sponsor circles and churches and other communities, our capacity to welcome looks more like this. And that represents an incredible vision of the extent of the capacity and the willingness we have as a nation. And it's the tapestry we want to see to be able to meet the needs of the moment. Thank you so much, all. I'm so much looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Naz. Gregory, I'll pass the microphone over to you now.
Thank you, Rachel. And what a perfect segue, Naz. Thank you. I'm really grateful, Rachel, that you invited me and OSF to this event. You all have been at Welcoming America at the vanguard of this new movement of welcome. And I'm really not just grateful, but I have been privileged to learn from you over the course of the past decade plus. I wanted to just offer a few words to frame this moment in history. I think about this year as the third milestone moment in the history of refugee protection, refugee resettlement over the past 75 or so years. The first milestone was in 1950 with the Displaced Persons Act after World War II. And it was followed in 1951 by the Refugee Convention. And I want to just pause on that point, because why did it take 5 years to get American public and political support to allow displaced persons in after the Holocaust and World War II? Because it really is something that takes effort. Even with the backdrop of World War II, it took a lot of engagement with the American public and with American political leaders to establish a system that would support refugees. It doesn't come always easily or naturally. So I think it's worth just keeping that date in mind, 1950 and 1951. The second date was in the late 70s when the Vietnamese boat lift happened. It was a pretty improvised affair, but it ended up saving the lives of over 2 million Vietnamese, many hundreds of thousands of whom came to the United States, many hundreds of thousands more came to Canada. And it's worth remembering that period, because that period concluded in the United States with landmark legislation, the 1980 Refugee Act, which established the current system of refugee resettlement here. But in Canada, it started a movement. It started a refugee sponsorship movement that has become the foundation of resettlement in Canada. And it's worth pausing on the distinction between what happened in the United States and what happened in Canada. In 2015 and 2016, the Canadians brought in 40,000 Syrians. 2 million Canadians were officially sponsors of those 40,000 Syrians. It's an extraordinary number. Something like 7 million Canadians say that they were involved in the process of resettling those 40,000 Syrians. And about half of Canadians over time say that they have been involved in one way or another in the sponsorship of refugees. That is a very different system than the one that we currently have in the United States. It's a system which both supports refugees through government action, but also embeds the act of welcome and integration into local communities all over Canada. And the result of that is that in Canada, there is no way for any political party to not advance welcoming policies, to not promote refugee resettlement. It will take you down if you do. It has the potential to help you win elections if you do it well, which is what happened with Justin Trudeau in 2015. His call to resettle Syrians helped him win that election back then. So now in the United States today, we have a very similar moment to 1950 and to the late 1970s and 1980. But what's perhaps different than that original milestone that I talked about post World War II is that the public enthusiasm for welcoming is just extraordinary. We've seen it in the context of Afghanistan. We've seen it even more in the context of Ukraine. And what's also different is that the US government is now leading on innovating when it comes to refugees. As Naz said, way in which we welcomed Afghan refugees this past summer was improvised, but effective. In March, the government, or in April, the government launched a system for sponsoring Ukrainians that has had an enormous uptake. I think the numbers are over 40,000 right now, applications from Americans to sponsor specific Ukrainians. 40,000 sponsors have emerged. It's probably closer to 400,000 people if you think about each family that's behind that sponsorship, each community that's behind that sponsorship application. People are standing up and saying they want to do this in numbers that are far greater than anything that we've seen in recent years. 40,000 sponsorship applications is greater than the total number of refugees that the US officially brought in 2018, 2019, and 2020 before the pandemic. I mean, it's an extraordinary number. And that was spontaneous. So we're at this moment where we can, I think, leave behind, if we invest well, the infrastructure for Americans to become a little bit more like Canadians, to be able to, as a matter of course, as a part of their life and their community, as a part of their own sense of identity, to contribute to the act of refugee resettlement. And I really want to emphasize something that Naz also said, which is people do this for the refugees, but they do it for themselves as well. They know that this act of compassion, this act of engagement, is as meaningful to their lives as it is transformative for the lives of refugees. And so I used to talk about this idea of sponsorship as addressing two crises, a displacement crisis, but also the loneliness crisis, the breakdown of civic community in this country. And I think this is what we're seeing all around us. I'll just close with two last thoughts. One is that I am part of a sponsorship community that my neighbors started in rural Connecticut. It's a town of 3,500. Over 200 of those people have contributed financially and with their time to bring in, thus far, a single Afghan family. We would have wanted to bring in more, but the process is pretty slow. And they are raring to go to bring in another Afghan family and a Ukrainian family. And I often say that this group has so much talent, so much desire to help stand up a new life for these families, that I would let them raise my own children. I mean, they are so skilled. They are so knowledgeable about the schools, the housing markets, the job markets. They really have inherent in them the ability to lead on integration. And I hope that we, through our collective efforts, can get to a system where that ability of Americans to really reach back to the greatest American tradition of welcome and unlock it and have that be part of the fabric of our communities and the fabric of our politics in ways that no one can ever try to take it down again. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for those powerful visions, and I am looking forward to continuing to build on them in the panel discussion that we're going to have. If we could just pull up the slide deck, I wanted to just say a few words about Welcoming America as some preface to the conversation that we're going to have now, which I think is really about taking this vision of welcoming as a norm that is strong enough to endure politicking, that is strong enough to ensure that that we can all belong in our society, and really turning it into a very tangible set of practices and infrastructure in communities that I think and I hope has the capacity to bring together both this new force of individuals stepping forward, but also bring in our institutions, because we know that making sure that people can access those institutions and that those institutions are themselves welcoming and equitable is an important piece of making this successful. So a little bit about Welcoming America, if we could go to the next slide. I talked a little bit about our vision. Our purpose is really about supporting the leadership of communities in building the policies and practices needed to create a welcoming environment. We could go to the next slide. We are a membership network of many of you here on this call today in communities across 48 states and partners across 8 countries, rowing together toward this vision. Some situated within local government and many situated outside of government. And we support communities. You can go back to the standard. Support communities by elevating what works through this learning laboratory of places who are in the work every day, and by codifying some of the policies and strategies that we know work best to actually produce more welcoming communities across these different domains. And if we could go to the next slide. There are 15 communities in this country that have reached the highest level of being a welcoming community, and many more in the pipeline to become certified as welcoming places, which means that we've gone in and done an audit of policies and practices that remove barriers to social, civic, and economic participation and create this broader environment so that everyone can thrive. And we really salute these 15 leaders. Next slide, please. So we know that communities are at different starting points. We know that to make all of this work, it really does take a village, and there are different entry points for local government, community philanthropy, refugee leadership, and organizations based in that leadership. And today on our panel, we're going to highlight some of the leaders and institutions who are vital to this work. So first, I want to introduce Amy Eusebio, who is the leader of the Office of Immigrant Affairs in a leading city, the city of Philadelphia. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
Next on our panel is Carla Gibson, who is Vice President of Programs with the Reach Healthcare Foundation in Kansas City, and has been instrumental in that city's work to develop a welcoming strategy. Welcome, Carla. Thanks for joining us today. Next on our panel, we have Dr. Dia Abdo, who is the founder and leader of Every Campus a Refuge, which is tapping into the power of our universities and students to support the welcoming movement. And we're really excited that she could be with us and share some of her really powerful vision with us today. And last but not least, I want to welcome Malak Sills, who wears many hats, as she reminded me yesterday, as a leader in her community, but among them is as board chair of Refugee and Immigrant Transitions. So I am going to transition us into the conversation today, and I want to start with you, Amy. I think we have heard this vision of what it takes to be welcoming as a society, but I want to bring it down to the local level and ask you to talk about the work that you've done to create really a welcoming infrastructure that you have been able to tap into, not only around the arrival of Afghans, but so many immigrant and refugee communities. So would love to have you share a little bit more about that work.
To be here and to share about, so what we're trying to pull off here in Philadelphia. So I'd say we're still developing our welcoming infrastructure. It's not quite where we want it to be, and we're actually really gracious for Welcoming America and Open Society Foundation for creating an opportunity for cities who are trying to do this work to receive some funding to do it better. But what we have been able to do thus far in Philadelphia is, when we talk about welcoming infrastructure, we're talking about like a standing table is what I like to call it. It's an ongoing table of public-private partners coming together to discuss emerging needs and gaps and solution together, and to leverage resources and coordinate resources together. And so Philadelphia was one of the receiving, became the main receiving airport for Operation Allies Welcome And that was our first taste of what it was going to look like in welcoming Afghan community. And to the point that's already been shared, we had so many offers of support and not a way to receive that or triage that. And then our refugee resettlement agencies were also getting a lot of offers of support, as I keep calling them, and working through that. And so what we did was in the fall, we launched a standing meeting, a monthly meeting with our refugee resettlement organizations to say, okay, what's next? What do you need help with next? How can we be supportive? How can we use the platform of the city to elevate your needs or coordinate resources? And so a couple examples I wanted to share to kind of like give folks, some tangible flavors of this is, one of the first things they did was say, we know that housing is going to be a major challenge. We have an affordable housing crisis in our city. In a traditional refugee resettlement process, we have time to find a place for folks, settle it in, and get them acclimated. And this was far from traditional, right? And folks were, Philadelphia, in the month of November, we received, I think it was like 300 to 400 people. That was like the second bulk of how many Afghan individuals were arriving in our city. And so they were able to have the foresight of like, we're going to need temporary housing. Can you help us gather hotels in our region? And so our Office of Immigrant Affairs and the role municipal government can play is as a convener. And so we reached out to our local hotel associations. We were able to gather a few folks and say like, hey, do you want to be part of the welcoming? Can you offer an affordable and competitive rate for temporary housing as people are trying, as the settlement agencies are trying to do their best to find stable, affordable housing that these families can afford. And we recruited something like 10 hotels that were like, I'm on board. So that was a fantastic project. And two more brief projects of like where folks can come together and where a welcoming infrastructure is critical. We in September also hosted during Welcoming Week a Renting to Refugees workshop. So in traditional resettlement, refugee resettlement organizations have their list of landlords that they rely on, who understand and are sensitized to what does it look like to rent to a refugee. Things like just cultural sensitivity, like maybe a background check is not necessary because they've already gone through extensive checks. Things like, hey, we can support you with language access. And so again, because of the volume of people coming in at once, they knew there was going to be a gap there. And so we were able to host a webinar with them where they were able to educate area landlords. And what was phenomenal is that the majority, we had over 300 people register. I think about half attended. Most had never rented to refugees before. And as a result of the webinar, we're more interested in renting to refugees and being part of the welcoming. So it was a fantastic outcome of what that can look like. And then we've also done initiatives around hiring and employment. So March we dubbed as Newcomer Hiring Month. And again, it was an opportunity for the city to bring some of the large employers in our region and match them up with Afghan who are ready to work. And so we were able to work with some of those organizations that do that job coaching, prepping, resume building, and do a matchmaking between employers that were hiring and then folks that were looking for work.
I love hearing about all of that. And then I just want to give Philadelphia a special shout out, because one of the things that impressed me so much as Afghans were arriving was you were, I think, very strongly advocating for the idea that this is about Afghans, but it's also about Haitians who are arriving here in this moment, and a kind of common infrastructure that's really supporting everyone. And I really appreciated seeing that. And I think that there's something very powerful in that. Which makes me want to turn over now to Carla, because one of the things that I think we've seen and are trying to support now too is the role of community-based philanthropy in this work, and in really trying to connect some of these dots between populations, between welcoming of newcomers and other conversations happening around equity. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done in Kansas City and your role in it, and how that all came to be.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. I'd be happy to do that. A little bit about our foundation first. We are a regional bi-state health conversion foundation. We fund in Missouri and Kansas. So we kind of straddle the state line. And our vision is that all people in our community achieve equitable health outcomes. And our mission is to advance health equity through care and coverage for underserved people in our region. I believe one of the greatest things that we have done is we have identified immigrant and refugees as a priority population for our investment. During our last strategic planning, our board had the foresight to do that. And we just went through strategic planning again for the next 5 years, and immigrant and refugee populations remain a priority population for our funding. Meaning, if you are serving those populations, if you have a project that is serving those populations, or I'm constantly out there being a champion for those populations, we want to hear from you. So what have we done since that last strategic planning? One of the things that I'm very proud of is our work with what we're calling Welcoming KC. Many of the welcoming projects or the welcoming work is started by a government office or a nonprofit. But in our case, our foundation stepped out there to say, we need this done. We have privilege and power. Let's use that to be the catalyst that starts this work. Now, we're not an operating foundation, so we never planned for it to live with us. We always planned to move it out, but we were the ones that got it started and invested in it first. Now, we didn't know what we didn't know. So we also had the foresight to partner with Welcoming America to help get us started on the right foot. So we brought in what we consider technical expertise, supported that through funding, and launched our development of a welcoming plan for our region. And eventually, that project has been moved over to our Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. We understand that nonprofits can't do it alone. Foundations can't do it alone. We have to have our business partners at the table if we're going to do this. So in a strategic way, and from the beginning, we have been arm in arm with our chamber. And that project actually lives there, and we have continued to fund it over at the chamber. So we're going to go for certification. We're preparing. I'm still on the leadership team. I've been at the table as a partner, not as just a funder, and have championed this work at our foundation and in the community. So that's one thing. The other thing that we do is we provide unrestricted funding to our nonprofits who serve immigrant and refugee communities, what we call core partners. So they are those organizations that we consider essential to seeing our mission through. We provide unrestricted funding to them, and I think that's critical for them to do their work. Another project that we developed was what we call CSER, Communities Concerned for Immigrants and Refugees. And what that is a learning network open to health, social services, and other community members interested in strengthening the health and well-being of refugee and immigrant communities. So that's another program that was seeded by our foundation. We sought out a partner and placed that initiative with that partner to bring it to fruition. So it was a vision here. We provide the funding. We found the right leader, And we funded the organization to do that based off of feedback we heard from our community that, believe it or not, those networks or those organizations that serve the population don't often come together for networking. They also don't often get ongoing learning opportunities from national experts, local experts in a formal fashion. And so that's what that network provides. So we are building a network of what we consider nonprofits and community folks that are really serving the population or from it or concerned with it. The other thing that I feel is very important is that we seed innovation. Two in particular projects that I would mention, both at two of our large healthcare systems, hospital systems in the area, we seeded the money to create what is called Cultural Health Navigators. It's in the interpreting department of one of our hospitals. And what they did was expand the role of the interpreter to be that of more of a cultural health navigator. The other one is a cultural health language coach that is at another one of our hospital systems. And interpreters in the medical setting have standards and get, in terms of their interpreting for medical services, there's a way to ensure that they are assessed and providing interpreting in an appropriate manner. But for behavioral health providers, there is no such standard. So what this program does is it works with behavioral health providers in nonprofit settings to ensure that when they are interpreting in a behavioral health like a therapy session or psychiatric session, that it is up to standard, you're using correct language, and so forth. So that was not in existence, at least here. And what we did was we seeded that program in our community to ensure that culturally appropriate services are being provided to our immigrant and refugee communities. So that's just some of the stuff we're doing and that we're proud of that has come out of our foundation as a result of really our board saying, we got to prioritize this population. They will always need our support, and we're going to go deeper and wider and dig in and really provide some strategic investment.
Thank you, Carla. I just continue to be in awe of your leadership and what you've done in Kansas City. And I think it really paints a clear picture of what it can look like when community philanthropy is really invested deeply in this work, and when the community as a whole is invested deeply in this work. And I want to go now to Malak because I think you touched, Carla, on a point that is just crucial in this work, which is the leadership coming out of our immigrant and refugee communities and the importance of the role that they play, the critical role that they play. And so, Malak, not to pigeonhole you in that, because again, I know you come at this from many perspectives, but maybe you can just share a little bit more about what your role has been and how others on this call might be best able to support it.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing everybody's perspectives. I'm so inspired to be on this panel with you all. For those who are new to me, I'm a refugee from Afghanistan, a philanthropist with the Sills Family Foundation, and a community leader at Refugee and Immigrant Transitions in Oakland, California. I've also been privileged to work alongside Welcome. And so as Rachel said, I bring many perspectives to the table today, and I'll try to hone down on just what was asked. Just to bring back what Gregory said, we're at such a pivotal time, seeing that Ukraine is unfolding right before us while we're still reckoning with Afghanistan. Our limitations are just more transparent than ever, and the next forced migration crisis is right around the corner. whether it comes from violence or climate issues. As a nation, we have to recognize that strengthening the entire ecosystem, including our citizens, including the community sponsors, it's vital to the success of our future as a nation. Community-based and refugee-led organizations are smaller actors in this ecosystem, and they've systemically been bypassed due to low visibility. So I always think of it as a ship in the middle of the ocean, and you have the visible parts of the ship and you have the bottom of the ship, and like people at the bottom, what's at the bottom of the ship isn't seen, so, and you don't think about what the needs are and is it being tended to or not, just making sure everything on top is working and looks good. But it's so critical that we resource the local organizations because they accompany and address the cultural, linguistic gaps between governments, communities, and resettlement efforts. They pick up all the pieces and are there for communities well beyond 90 days, 2 years, and even 5 years, which we know resettlement can take. And just understanding the importance of funding refugee-led and community-based organizations, you have to believe in offering the practice of being human together in the face of extremely dehumanizing systems and circumstances that people are going through. And I feel that those two things together with a failing immigration system are how community-based organizations came about. It's because they're realizing that there are gaps that we need to support. And through my work and uncovering and mapping the nation's organizations, Welcome did put out an RFP for Afghan-led organizations and any organizations supporting refugees. And it was so amazing to uncover jewels, within our nation, just hidden, and they've been working in these communities for many, many years without the support systems. It's volunteer-based supporters, and it's incredible how open and receptive the organizations are to this community sponsorship idea. To them, it's like, wow, like it's a dream to have more people, more volunteers, more people wanting to take the load and carry it together. And so it's been incredible. It's a wonderful time to take what we know being in the microcosms of the field and be able to make it visible, because everybody's watching. Our nation is watching, our world is watching at how we are developing and how we are going to handle this situation where we have to deal with it now. We know that community-based organizations are vital for the success of the work, and our analysis concludes that connectivity amongst these organizations will create the synergy and strength that's needed to empower communities across our nation to welcome, support, and really encourage successful transitions. So my role is giving visibility and shining light on these hidden gems, on these hidden organizations, these people who are the community sponsors, who want to connect with this new wave of community sponsors.
Thank you, Malak, for reminding us just what a rich resource that is. And I want to give a shout out here to Welcome.us for financially backing and shining a spotlight on organizations and efforts like yours. And, with the hopes that inspires others to do the same. I know we're running short on time, but I want to make sure we have enough time to hear from you, Dia, because your efforts, I think, are just incredible and a reminder of the potential of so many more folks stepping forward in this moment. And so would love to just hear more about Every Campus a Refuge and what you can share with us about the opportunities that are before us right now.
Thank you, Rachel. So a little bit about me. I'm Dr. Dia Abdo. I'm a professor of English at Guilford College. I'm the daughter of Palestinian refugees and an immigrant to this country. And I was really struck by some of the things that I heard today. One of them is that our system has, it's been laid bare to us some of the failings because of the crises that emerged that we can't respond to. Every Campus of Refuge was founded in 2015 in response to the Syrian refugee crisis. But our collective goal, as I'm hearing it and understanding it, is to create ecosystems and systems that are sustainable, that are beyond crises, right? That we can create infrastructures that welcome folks, newcomers, and integrate them in ways that are sustainable and vast. Every Campus of Refuge was founded in response to Pope Francis's call on every parish in Europe to host a refugee family. And I was struck by his invocation to small communities to do the work of welcome and integration. And a very basic, simple idea occurred to me that colleges and universities are exactly like parishes. We're exactly like cities. We have housing, we have cafeterias, we have clinics, and most importantly, we have people who can do the work of welcome. And so in 2015, every Campus of Refuge was founded to mobilize every college and university in this country to host refugees temporarily on campus grounds and support them in their resettlement, thereby responding to the housing crisis, especially upon immediate arrival for refugees. Colleges and universities have a lot of underutilized resources. Some of them is housing, some of it is housing. And also to provide access to college and university facilities and amenities like gyms and libraries and art supplies and things like that. And also a cohesive and well-trained cohort of community volunteers who can provide resettlement and integration support. And we've been doing that work for the last 7 years. Guilford College is the flagship chapter. We've hosted over 80 refugees on Guilford's campus. We're currently hosting 16 Afghan evacuees, and other chapters have joined across the country from coast to coast. So we have chapters in New York, in Georgia, and in California. We're really trying to tap into something that you said, Rachel, which is abundance, right? Because there is that myth of scarcity. But if you look at the map that NAS provided, and I'll share a map in post-webinar material of how many colleges and universities there are in this country, there are 4,000. Imagine every one of those to be a city, the ecosystem that opens up, the untapped potential for resources, whether it's housing or human resources or facilities and amenities, is really, I think, expansive. I think Anthony's going to share that. Thank you. I mean, there are some parts of this country that you can't even see because there's so many higher education institutions. So tapping into the abundance that really allows refugees to land in a softer way and to begin more strongly with free temporary housing and access to those facilities and amenities. I think very importantly too, and we can stop sharing that slide. One of the things that Gregory mentioned is the public perception of and mobilization around refugee support and resettlement. The more our communities see us doing this at the local level, because refugee resettlement is a federal program, but integration and welcome and belonging happens at the community level. The more we see our neighbors do this, the more we see our higher education institution do this, and every city, every town has higher ed institutions. The more that we see this happening on the ground, the less political it becomes and the more community driven it becomes. And so that's the charge. The charge is to mobilize our untapped resources across this country, especially higher education, to participate in welcoming, whether it's Ukrainian refugees, Afghan evacuees, or refugees from all over the world. At Guilford College, we've welcomed folks from all over the world, from the DRC, from Uganda, from Rwanda. I'll put some information in the chat, but appreciate the ability to speak more about our program here.
Thank you, Dia. I wish we had another hour, 2 hours with all of you, but we don't. And I'm just so grateful for your stories. And my hope is that we can come back to all of you out there in the next year, 2 years, with a map that is absolutely lit up from coast to coast with all of these shared efforts. I'm so grateful for it. I'm going to let Kari from welcome.us and my colleague Daniel Valdez close us out with a few ways that we can take action in our own communities and support one another in this work. But just want to again thank all of our speakers here today for your phenomenal work and words of inspiration. Over to you, Kari.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I want to go back to the topic you led with at the start of this webinar, which is how do we go from being a country of strangers to a country of neighbors? And so I want to offer two tangible things we can take action on at this time. And one is to build on what Malak was speaking about earlier, is really for each of us to seek out these community-based organizations that are supporting newcomers across the country. We learned in reviewing over 350 applications that came into the Welcome Fund RFP that there is incredible innovative work being done in our largest cities and in our smallest towns. They come in all shapes and sizes, and they are providing holistic support on a shoestring budget. To our government and community leaders on this call, we ask you to seek avenues to include these frontline organizations in your local convenings. To our local funders on this call, we'd ask you to seek avenues to know more about these organizations, knowing that many of them don't have the capacity to have a comms department or to do full outreach, and in many cases are all volunteer-led. Second, as Gregory highlighted at the start of this webinar, we have an opportunity to really be a part of this new movement and playing a role in sponsoring refugees directly. And the first step in being a part of sponsorship is learning about what that entails. So I would encourage you, we've got a quick slide on this, to check out our website, welcome.us, and then in particular, ukraine.welcome.us, to learn avenues of how you can support sponsoring, step-by-step guides, FAQs, training modules that were developed in partnership with our community sponsorship hub. So that's, one tangible way we can all be a part of it is learning more about the role we can each play with this exciting opportunity of mobilizing 100,000 Americans to sponsor 100,000 Ukrainians. So thank you again for this time and this great discussion today. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Kari. I'm so glad that we were able to connect on this. Just for the last minute here as well, for folks, thank you all for joining us. For Welcoming America, there's a number of ways that you all can stay connected. A lot of you here are part of our network already, but if you're not, please connect with our members. We talked about how important it is to work at the local level. And so we have a list and a map of members, and you can go to our website, welcomingamerica.org, and look at our network and connect with folks there. We'd happy to do that as well. Of course, subscribe to our newsletter, and you can schedule a call with us if you're looking to find ways that you can connect at the local level. And figure out how we can continue to expand the infrastructure of local communities to be more welcoming and inclusive to newcomers. Of course, we have Welcoming Week coming up, September 9th through the 18th. So please think about how you can participate during Welcoming Week. We encourage all of our members, as well as all of our partners and local communities, to participate during Welcoming Week. And we just recently announced the site for our next conference next year in San Jose. So we hope to see many of you there, and we'll be sharing more details out of that soon. But thank you again for joining us. We'll be following up with folks and sharing out this slide deck for everyone as well to have. Thank you so much for the time, and we will continue to work together to create a more welcoming America. Thank you.